Welcome to the DYA Network, the #1 platform for helping young athletes and families navigate the world of sports, training, development, injury prevention, and now opportunities off the field. Today, we're diving deep into a topic every athlete parent needs to understand, not just succeed, but to survive in the future of sports. We're joined by Kristi Dosh, a former practicing attorney and one of the nation's top sports business experts. Kristi is leading contributor of Forbes, the founder of Business of College Sports, and has reported major outlets like ESPN, the Washington Post, and Sports Business Journal. She's the author of 2 major books on the business of college sports, including her newest release, The Athlete's NIL Playbook, which is a must-read for families navigating the complex world of name, image, and likeness. Kristi is also a sought-after consultant for athletic departments and collectives nationwide and teaches courses on NIL at the University of Florida. Today, Kristi is here with us to break down the truth about NIL, collectives, and how athletes at every level can build their brand. She'll also show us how parents and coaches can best protect and guide their athletes in this new landscape. Kristi, welcome to Network Nation today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So one thing I want to do is that we always hear a backstory. This is where I want to go with it. You had a unique background. What was the turning point when you realized you could turn your love of sports into a career?
Well, when I went to law school, I sort of hoped I would get a job in sports for a team or a league. And I ended up working at the WTA for a summer. And then I did have a job offer from a Major League Baseball team, which as a fan is my favorite sport. But it paid about a quarter of how much I could make with the law firm job offer I had. And I had law school loans to pay back. I always tell students now, go to the law school that allows you to take out the least number of loans because they will follow you. And inform your choices for a long time. So I passed on the MLB offer, went to work in a big firm, nothing related to sports. So I actually thought my career in sports that I had let it go, that it was over. But I had started blogging in law school about legal and business issues in sports. And I sort of kept that up into my career. I graduated law school in '07, and I worked in a practice area that was really impacted by the downturn in '08, '09, '10. And that actually gave me more time to blog. And over the course of several years, that caught the attention of some networks, including ESPN. And they hired me to be a sports business reporter, which wasn't a role I even knew existed until maybe 6 months before I got offered the job. So it was an unexpected change in course.
Well, that's a great journey. Here's what we're going to get into because I hear this all the time. What is NIL? Some of these parents, they don't really understand. What is NIL and the simplistic definition of it for them?
Everyone has a right of publicity. So we all sort of own our own name, image, and likeness. And for other people to use it, they have to get our permission. If they want to, take a photo of us, kids see this all the time. You go to camp and you sign a release saying, photographs are going to be taken of your kid while they're at this camp. That is giving someone else the right to your child's name, image, and likeness. And prior to 2021, the NCAA, the NAIA, all the major sports organizations in college sports had rules against athletes monetizing their NIL. So they could not get paid for anything that used their name, image, and likeness, autographs, social media posts, public appearances. There's a whole long list of things. But name, image, and likeness is sort of your ability to monetize who you are.
And the thing is, I hear too, I hear name, image, and likeness and collectives. What's the difference?
Okay, so a collective is generally a group of boosters who support one institution. There are a few exceptions. There's a collective I know that is for HBCU institutions, and so they work with more than one, but almost all the collectives work with one school, and they were started by groups of boosters who wanted to create NIL opportunities for athletes. And in the beginning, it was these groups of boosters going to local businesses or maybe to businesses owned by other boosters and alumni and trying to match them up with athletes for NIL deals. Like, hey, car dealership guy, we can get this is quarterback to advertise your dealership on his Instagram. And they were doing that sort of matchmaking. But they also started offering memberships to fans. You could pay $5, $9, $20 a month. They would have these tiers, and you would get access to some things, like maybe they would raffle off an autographed helmet, or they would have a Zoom meeting where you could do a Q&A with 5 of the football players. And it really allowed fans access to the athletes, but it also allowed the collective to pay the athletes for being part of that. That's what it was like in the beginning. It has really changed over the last 4 years, and collectives now are mostly known for raising large sums of money and then signing contracts with, the top 1 to 2% of athletes at a school. They are not supposed to induce them to come to the school, but we all know that it's happening. And now we're seeing multi-million-dollar contracts where collectives are raising money from donors in order to sign these athletes, and the athletes have to do something in return. They have to make public appearances. Maybe they have to autograph some items, but it pretty quickly went from small potatoes kind of deals to multi-million-dollar deals.
And that's what you hear the athletes now. I hear it, especially the Power Five levels. Where's the bag? I heard coaches say that. Where's the money? And it's changing sports altogether. And that's why let's do this. Let's get into a little bit about the book. You wrote the book, The Athlete's NIL Playbook. And what I like about it, we were just talking off the cuff before coming on, is that what I like about what Kristi is doing is education. And everyone you need to, especially a lot of the parents that are listening that we work with, is that this navigation, it's a lot. We're going to dig deep, but I'm going to not go too deep. We're going to keep it simplistic for a lot of our younger parents that are listening with youth, but also high school and some of you college kids. I've already told you, listen up to what we're talking about today. I like the book. Tell me the how-to guide is what it really is, right? And you talk on some good bullet points we're going to address there. Why did you write the book? What really drove you to say, wait a minute, this is enough? There's a wild, wild west out there. There's bits and pieces of information, I'm sure, and bringing it collective to get an understanding and have one source that they can go to. So I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Yeah, a big part of it was just the parents in my inbox. As a sports business reporter, I never received an email from the parent of an athlete prior to NIL. I receive multiple emails a day now, to the point where I had to start a Facebook group for parents that has over 1,000 parents in it now, so that I can answer the questions a little more publicly, because everybody has similar questions and I can't keep up with the emails as much as I would like to. And I was telling you before we got going, by the time parents come to me and ask questions, I would say 50% of the emails that I get, something bad has already happened.
Yes.
Their kid has already signed a contract they shouldn't have signed. An agent has already stolen money from them. A brand has already taken advantage of their athlete and is using the content in some way they're not supposed to. I get found when the bad things happen. I want to reach people before the bad things happen, so that athletes and parents alike will be a little more educated about this going into it, because there's no reason why you should already be educated. This is a brand new space. It's something that no one really understood they were going to have to navigate when their kid got into sports at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. But now it's a very real, not problem, but opportunity as well. And not just for that top 1 to 2%. We talked about collectives and how a lot of that money is being funneled. It's mainly to football, men's basketball, and to a smaller degree, women's basketball players. But there are actually athletes in every sport, in every division, at every level, who are making money on their NIL. So, in addition to having some sort of warnings and some watch out for this kind of things in the book, I also wanted to give people a playbook for, okay, your athlete's not a household name. They don't have 100,000 followers on social media. That doesn't mean they can't take advantage of NIL. And so I really focused in the book on doing case studies on athletes whose names you probably aren't going to recognize. And that was actually the point. I wanted it to, be relatable and attainable, and to see that these athletes are doing really cool things with their NIL. In some cases, things that set them up for that career they want to have after sport. In some cases, helping supplement, tuition shortages. I have a D2 tennis player who's in there, and she talks about how one NIL deal allowed her to pay her tuition for the entire year. Does not have a huge social media following. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say she had like 1,500, 2,000 followers on Instagram, something like that. It was not huge. And so those are the stories we don't see in the media. And as a media member, I can tell you it's because those headlines just don't get a lot of clicks. And so the people we write for aren't going to make money on our articles. And so we don't get to write about those things. And the book allowed me to write about all the amazing stories I've heard from athletes that haven't made it into major publications.
Well, and this is when I'm listening to this, I'm looking at two areas of it too. Is that we start talking about opportunities, it's a misconception because we see the big contracts that are out there. So a lot of younger parents listen up to this too. And what I mean by breaking this into two sections, I'm going to ask you questions on is that we're talking college, we're talking D1 to D3 and AIA. There's opportunities there. Everyone thinks it's overemphasized D1 athlete, D1. There's D2, D3 great athletes. So everybody get that out of your head. There's some D1 athletes that there's a lot of D2, D3 that are great athletes. So we're thinking beneath of your growth and your potential. But what I want to break it down into two areas, because you know now you're in Florida. So I think you're approved there, is that high school athletes have the opportunity, right? So we're looking at that end of it, but we're also looking at college. Let's break that down a little bit because there's some parents that we work with that we have young athletes in high school, even middle school, that are good athletes and part of their development path. We're starting to see with these travel sports programs with their multi-billion-dollar industry, it's going to be part of their brand too. How do we develop these athletes? Because what do they sell? Everyone listen up. Is they're selling how many kids they get into university. That's their selling point. So for you parents out there, I want you to kind of navigate the book would be a good point. But what could you touch base on if I have a kid that is in the eighth grade, right, versus a kid that's going to college, and we already talked about this in the 11th grade. Kind of walk through that a little bit because I don't think parents understand at a young age it's coming. It's coming. It's not here in Michigan, but I promise you eventually it will be here in the state of Michigan because I don't know the percentage of states that have already been approved, but it's a lot. And
It
it's a
is.
lot.
It's
So
more,
I'll
I
let you
think we're
take from
into
there.
the 30s now for the number of states that have approved. I think in the mid 30s to high 30s for the number of states that have approved it at the high school level. Florida just approved it in the last year. So it was a long time coming here before it happened. The youngest athlete in my book with a deal is 8 years old. And I'm not saying if you have an 8-year-old, you need to like be putting a lot of time and energy into this. That youth athlete and his parents were interested in this and pursued it. There's a parent in my Facebook group. She was actually one of the first parents who joined my Facebook group, and she is a former D1 athlete herself, and she has a daughter who's a youth volleyball athlete. And I want to believe when she joined my group, she was either 10 or 11, and now I think she's 11 or 12. And the daughter was really interested in NIL. She wanted to be the youngest person to get an NIL deal. She was beat out by the 8-year-old, but the 8-year-old's male, so I think she was the youngest, maybe female that we know of who did a deal. And it was really driven by the athlete. And I don't have kids, so I'm not going to tell anybody how to parent. But at that age, I do think it makes a lot of sense for it to be driven by the kid. If they have heard about NIL and they want to engage in it, great. But I don't know at that age you should be pushing them to add this to on top of school and their friends and their sport and everything else. But this athlete, she went to the gym where she trains and works out, and she sort of educated them about NIL and said, here's how you're allowed to work with me. I could put up social media posts that would help attract more youth athletes to your training facility. And she pitched herself. And I think, in fact, she gave us the pitch. And it's actually in the book. Quite a few athletes gave us successful pitches that they sent. And I know we have at least one from her. And she ended up doing her first deal with this gym that she already trains at. And since then, she's gone to a couple of restaurants in town, I believe, and has reached out to some brands on Instagram. And this has really just been driven by her being interested in this space. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity for those kids who are like early on really entrepreneurial, the ones that are out there putting out the lemonade stand. This is like the modern version of that. Instead of having to sit on the street corner selling lemonade, now you can talk about the helmet that you love or the batting gloves that you love on your Instagram. So I think there are some cool opportunities for younger athletes there.
Well, she has a gift already. I mean, at that age, and she's already know how to market and promote herself. That's a skill a lot of adults don't even know how to do. So she strategically set herself up. So what I want to do is hit some of these areas. One of the areas I think we really need to hit on is that, like here in the state of Michigan, I was just talking about Bryce Underwood. Everybody knows here in Michigan, he's going to U of M, top quarterback in the country. He's there now. Everyone that I hear kids, he got $10 million. Wow, $10 million. I said, well, we got to look underneath the iceberg. You're seeing the top of it, but there's a lot of layers underneath this that you don't understand. And that's why I'm using an example. I don't know Bryce. I don't know his family. Congratulations to him, but I know they had to go through a lot of things here to understand it. So I want to use that as an example. It's $10 million, but everybody understand it's not $10 million. It's some layers of this. So let's talk about it because a lot of people don't understand the legal perspective of it, right? We don't understand how that has to be taxed. What did they need to do to protect themselves? Just like it would here with the automotive industry in Michigan. Everybody knew, oh, 08, When Chrysler went bankrupt, everybody thinks, well, they got bankrupt to protect themselves, but they kept doing business, right? So it's a business end they need to understand. If not, the wolves are out there. And I get it talking about I know you talked about, I've heard about the new revenue and some things out there with these. Anyone can call themselves an agent, which is scary. Yeah, we'll get into that. So we won't be long. I want you to kind of touch base on that a little bit from a legal perspective, especially you being an attorney.
Yeah, on the Bryce Underwood deal and really on all these big deals, I will sort of tell a story on myself in that the first year I went to work for ESPN, I was paid as an independent contractor, and that is how all these athletes are being paid. They're not employees of the universities. That's a whole nother legal debate that's coming down the road, but they're being paid as independent contractors, and so they are responsible for their own taxes. They're not W-2 like a lot of us have become used to. Taxes are not being taken out on them. When I went to work at ESPN, my agent didn't do a great job explaining to me how that was going to work and just how much I needed to put aside. And when I got the tax bill for the first year, I nearly fainted. I could not
Mm-hmm.
believe how much money I owed, and I had not properly set aside for it, quite honestly. I ended up meeting, I'm an attorney, but tax law is not my thing, and I'm certainly not an accountant. So I went and met with an accountant, and I ended up forming an LLC that's taxed as an S corp. But we don't have to get into all that. But I went to an accountant who set me up with the right structure going forward, and that was 2012. That is still how I operate my money from books and from speaking and writing and all the different things that I do. It all goes through this LLC that I formed way back then, and it has saved me so much heartache and has made it a lot more manageable so that I'm not in trouble with the IRS and so that I'm properly setting that aside. But you're talking about 17 and 18-year olds who are signing for, hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars. And you would think, well, they've got agents and financial advisors. They don't all have that. And in
They
fact, we
don't.
can dig into this more, but we just saw sort of what happened with Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, whose dad was acting largely as his agent. And maybe overplayed their hand at Tennessee, and they ended up at UCLA for less money, which a whole nother story. But you really need to have the right advisors around you. And you sort of alluded to it earlier. There are a lot of folks in this space I have run across: attorneys, financial advisors, agents. Maybe not. Actually, I'll take attorneys out of that. It's been agents who are non-attorneys and accountants. And financial advisors who saw this as a money grab. They knew how much money was going to be coming into NIL. They saw this as an opportunity to further their own careers, and they have been taking advantage of athletes. There's no regulation by the NCAA. There's really no one to protect these athletes except for themselves and their parents. So it's really important not just to hire these people, but to hire the right people and to ask the right questions before you hire them to ensure you're ending up with someone good.
Okay, let's look at two perspectives of that because it's just what you deal with. Everybody, it's like a 1099. You're independent contractor, right? And so you got to take the taxes out. But what would you? So if I'm a young parent, I'm listening to and what I advise everybody get the book. We'll talk about it at the end. But where do I start? What do I do? Right? When do I start in middle school? Do I set up as an LLC? Do I go look for it? Because looking at contracts, there's loopholes in them, and you can be held to breach a contract if you don't know what you're reading. Just like you said, a corporate attorney is different than and taxing, everything. All this stuff are areas that everybody needs to understand. Unless you're deep into that and understand how these laws change, you can get burned. So I see this thing, and I got a question for you. I asked near the end. I want to ask this now, but walk just basically through what would you tell a parent right now? Because I know I have some parents that are going to listen and say, Dave, why don't you ask that question? So I'm going to ask it for you. What if right now I'm in the ninth grade and I see my kid has a passion? Because we have some kids right now, it's not parent driven, which I talk about a lot. The parents are driving you to all these practices and it's led by them. It shouldn't be. It should be a drive and passion for a young athlete. Not that you're going after the money, but let's face it, if you can learn and there's an opportunity to build a relationship, build a brand for the young athlete, what would you tell a parent that the kid might be in the eighth or ninth grade?
Yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of opportunities at that age. As far as forming an LLC and that sort of thing, I did ask an accountant in an article I wrote sometime in the last couple of years about NIL, like at what point do you need to think about starting an LLC? And this is one person's opinion. So you should go talk to someone yourself with your
Right.
individual situation. But he said, if you think you're going to make $40,000 or more in 1 year on NIL deals, you need to be setting up an LLC and talking to somebody about how exactly to structure that. So that was sort of his cutoff point. And I'm sure there are other accountants who have different cutoff points, but that makes some sense to me, sort of based on what I've seen with my own situation over the years. And, get those systems in place. People are already filing for trademarks with high school athletes. If you've got a nickname you go by, something like that, they're grabbing the trademarks. That's not necessarily a cheap process. It can cost you, I'd say, anywhere from $1,800 to $4,000, depending on who the accountant, I'm sorry, who the attorney is, and how long that process takes, and whether you have a trademark that's easier or more difficult to get through. So there are some things that high school and even middle school athletes are starting to deal with already. I think it's really important to, again, surround yourself with the right people, agents, financial advisors, and avail yourself of the education that's out there. There are quite a few programs online I've run across that have NIL education. Obviously, I wrote this book as a means to get that education in people's hands. I always told people from the beginning of NIL, I never wanted to take money from athletes. And to this day, I have never taken a single penny from an athlete for NIL. I said I want to get paid by schools to come in and consult or speak. And, I certainly am making my money in this space, but I didn't want to make it off the backs of athletes. And unfortunately, not everyone out there is like that. And so you need to ask the right questions and talk to people who have worked with these advisors you're hiring. Before you hire an agent, talk to their current clients. Try and find former clients you can talk to. Same thing with financial advisors. You got to do your due diligence, because you can really set yourself up in some messy situations. I just heard from somebody the other day where their agent, and I'm putting that in air quotes because you mentioned earlier, there's no certification process for NIL agents. Anyone can walk out their front door today and start calling themselves an NIL agent. And somebody contacted me because their agent, in air quotes, had filed their trademark application. He filed it in his name. He owns the trademark, not the athlete.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different things to watch out for here. And I kind of feel sorry for parents because there's a lot of different angles to consider here, and not a lot of education to be found around it.
And actually with perpetuity too, where it can be forever, right? If they don't look at what it is, it's like I have the rights to this forever. And if they don't understand that, you've lost the rights to that. So that's important. What about international students? How does it
Oh,
apply to
so
international students?
it's a tough area. So if
Yeah.
an international student is on a student visa, they cannot work in the United States. And it's not work like you and I consider going to a boss and getting a W-2. Work
Hmm.
looks a little bit different under the definitions when we're talking about a student visa. International student athletes cannot do anything active while they're in the United States. They cannot post on social media for a brand. They cannot sign autographs. They can't do anything that requires their name, image, and likeness to be sort of actively in use. There are some passive opportunities they can be part of. So, for example, group licensing at the college level is really good for international athletes because they can be part of those deals where they get their name on the back of a jersey or where they're part of a trading card set. They can license the use of their name, image, and likeness to these companies, and they can receive payment for it, but they cannot advertise it. So if there's a jersey with their name on it, they're allowed to participate in that and to receive funds for that, but they can't post it on their own social media while they're in the United States and say, hey, look at my jersey, go buy it. Whereas students who are US citizens can do that. International student athletes cannot. So there's actually an entire section in the book on different scenarios of what international athletes can and can't do, which I worked with two immigration attorneys on because not my area of law, guys. I have learned a lot about it since NIL started, but there are two women who've been sort of leading the charge, helping international athletes get other types of visas, an O1A and a P1A, where they can participate in NIL fully. But that's really reserved for athletes who are at the very top of their respective sports. And some sports are easier than others to get those visas for. So there is a whole section in the book just for international athletes. And if you go back in my podcast archives on the business of college sports, there's a couple of podcasts with immigration attorneys as well.
Okay, so that we'll get that information too. We can connect with you on that. And I know there's something new coming up, like the new revenue sharing, right? And I think that's more driven for, well, let's face it, the bigger sports that are making the money are football and basketball. We already talked about that. And women's basketball could probably be the other one. Kind of so they understand how this revenue sharing thing, just briefly touch on it for
So that's coming out of a case that's called House v. NCAA, and you might hear people talking about the House settlement. As we're recording this, the judge is sort of in the decision-making process. She just recently told the attorneys to go back and change something. So we're waiting for that change to be made, and then we will see whether she approves it or not. However, I, along with many other people I know in this space, believe that revenue sharing is coming, whether she approves the settlement or not, because schools have already begun preparing for it. They've already been making massive changes in their athletic departments, both financially and structurally, to get ready for revenue sharing. And it's why you saw a deal so big for Bryce Underwood. We're starting to see these bigger deals because they're not just going to be the NIL money from the collectives anymore. It's actually going to be a portion of the athletic department's revenue. So in year one, which would start July 1st of 2025, schools can offer up to $20.5 million in revenue sharing, each individual school. And they get to decide how they divide that, which sports they're giving it to, which individual athletes are getting how much. And the word on the street is for those programs that have FBS level football, they are planning to share 75 to 85% of that money with football athletes, 10 to 15% with men's basketball, and then sort of the rest for everybody else. And so outside of football and men's basketball, I've heard some women's basketball, I've heard some baseball, I've heard volleyball and hockey in a couple of places, but those I would say are more the exception than the rule. It is largely football and men's basketball that are going to be getting these large 6 and 7 figure sort of revenue sharing offers. And when you mentioned earlier that that Bryce Underwood's contract, there's more to it than just what you hear. There's going to be a lot more to these contracts. And in fact, I had to try to write the final chapter of the book on revenue sharing and on what to watch out for in those contracts on kind of limited information because the contracts had just started going out. I managed to get a hold of quite a few. I brought in some attorney friends who had seen and negotiated more of them, and we tried to get as much as we could in. But obviously, this space will be evolving, so I'm going to continue to update the website for the book with more information, but you've got to watch out for some stuff there. There are what's called clawback provisions where schools are going to try to take back money they give you if you decide to transfer. There are buyout clauses like we see in coaching contracts. And in fact, just yesterday, we got word that the very first lawsuit is going to be filed. The Arkansas collective is going to go after Madden Iamaliva for transferring from Arkansas to UCLA and try to get the buyout in his contract paid. So that'll be the first time we see, do these buyout clauses hold up or not? But these are really complex contracts, and your athletes absolutely should not be signing these without an attorney looking at them. I am an attorney. I read a lot of them, and they are complicated. So please don't sign these just because you see the big dollar amount, because there's a lot of exceptions and hidden language in there that you need to look out for and that you can potentially get taken out. When I talked to attorneys about negotiating these, they said the schools are taking a lot of this out when they push back. So you could have two players on a team where one got a legal, an attorney and got legal assistance and got the buyout clause and some of the other things taken out, and another player who just signed it because he was excited for the money, and now he's subject to all those restrictions, and they play side by side on the field. So you've got to avail yourself. There are attorneys who are incredibly affordable in this space, and it will save you a lot of heartache and probably money in the long run.
And see, that's why I like with the book. And what we're going to do is get into it now. The book, where can they find your book? Because I know it's coming out, I believe, in July, right? How can we connect with you on what social media platforms can everyone get in touch with you on?
Yeah, the book has its own website now because I'm going to be updating things so that if something becomes outdated in the book, there will be, new information on the website, although most of it is not going to change. It's the athletesnilplaybook.com, and you can go ahead and pre-order it now. It's up for pre-order and will deliver July 2nd. And then will also be available in some other formats. I've heard we're getting an audiobook, but it's going to be a few months behind the print book and the ebook. But if you like audio and you want to be able to listen while you're driving around to practice, that will be available in a few months. But you can go ahead and pre-order it. And then I'm on pretty much every platform with the same username. It's Sports Biz Miss, MISS at the end. So I'm pretty active on Instagram and TikTok and X. And then hopefully too, I can send you the link link for the parents Facebook group. Totally free.
Yes.
You can ask all the questions you want. I even let you ask questions anonymously if you don't want people to know, your entire situation, but you can learn a lot from the questions other people are asking as well. And I'm starting to do a live workshop every month. So we actually did a workshop on revenue sharing contracts next month. We're about to do a workshop on how to hire an agent and the questions that you should be asking. So trying to put tons of free education out there too.
Love it, love it, love it. And we'll have all the links, everyone, so you can get in contact with Kristi. I got to ask you one last question today. What would you tell a parent, anything out of everything we talked about today? If there's one message you want to get to any parent out there, what would that message be right now before we close out?
So I've been using this tagline in a lot of my marketing for the book, and it's NIL is for everyone.
Yes.
100%, there are athletes in every sport at every level who are taking advantage of their NIL, some in really interesting and fun ways. And I love the athletes who have that future sort of view of what am I doing after my sport, and how
Yes.
can I do something with my NIL that helps me get there? There are such great examples out there of that. So don't think that just because you don't have a huge following, or you're not a household name, or you're not in one of those big money sports, that NIL isn't something that you can participate in, because it absolutely is.
That's what I love to hear. Everyone, build your brand now. I mean, you're not, all of us won't make it to play pro. Some won't play power school, but it doesn't mean greatness is not within you. Thanks, Kristi, for coming to Network Nation today. Everyone, have a phenomenal day. I always close out with give 100% in life, pursuing your dreams and never give up. Everyone, take care.